All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You ever just get, totally stuck?
Stuck.
Yeah, just scrolling and scrolling through Netflix or standing in the grocery store just staring at all the options.
Oh, yeah. You mean too many choices?
Exactly. Even just picking a drink, so many kinds of sparkling water now. It's nuts.
I hear you. It's funny because we think more options are good.
More freedom, yeah.
Yeah.
But does it actually make us happier? Do we make better choices?
That is the big question, and it's something psychologists have been looking into.
And that's what we're going to deep dive into today, this whole idea of the paradox of choice.
The paradox of choice, yeah.
Basically, having more choices might actually make us less happy. And there's this guy, Barry Schwartz.
Oh, yeah, I know his work.
He wrote a book all about this back in 2004, The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less. So we're going to unpack all that today.
Cool.
See if all this choice is really progress or just making things harder. What do you think?
Well, we're bombarded with information and choices, especially now, right? Online everywhere.
Yeah.
You'd think it'd lead to more happiness, but maybe not.
All right, so let's start with Barry Schwartz. He's a psychologist and really brought this idea to the forefront.
Yeah, he basically argues that all these choices, across every part of our lives, have kind of changed how we make decisions.
Interesting.
Instead of choice being a good thing, freedom and all that,
right,
it's kind of become a source of stress.
Oh, so instead of it being the solution,
It's become the problem. Yeah, in a way.
And it's more than just a minor annoyance.
Right. It's not just that it's a little annoying. He's talking real psychological stuff here.
Okay, what kind of stuff?
Well, anxiety, for
Yeah.
one. Are you making the right decision? All that worry.
Oh, I definitely feel that.
Then there's regret, after you made the choice, that what if feeling.
Ugh, the worst.
And this is interesting, maybe even blaming yourself when a choice doesn't work out because of all the options.
Oh, so it's with all these choices, we expect perfection.
Exactly. And when it doesn't happen, we feel like it's our fault for not picking better.
So instead of feeling like we've got all this power to choose.
You just feel paralyzed. Yeah, sometimes.
And isn't there a name for that when we just freeze up?
Oh, yeah. Choice paralysis. It's like when there are too many options and your brain just stops.
It's too much to process.
Exactly. It's just too much to even start comparing everything. So you do nothing.
Which is super frustrating, obviously.
Totally. You need to choose something, but you can't.
So choice overload is when we're just bombarded.
Yeah, choice overload is that feeling of, whoa, this is too much, I can't do. It's like the engine behind this whole paradox.
Okay. And then we have maximizers versus satisficers. What's the difference?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic one. So a maximizer, they got to have the absolute best every single time.
Oh, I know a few people like that.
Right. They do tons of research, compare every detail. But buying a simple toaster takes them a week.
Oh my gosh, yes, totally.
But here's the irony. They might end up with a slightly better outcome.
But they're miserable the whole time.
Yeah, it's stressful. They're never really satisfied because what if something better was out there?
Makes sense. So if you're listening and you spend hours researching every purchase, even small ones,
You might be a maximizer.
maybe try setting a time limit just to keep your sanity.
Totally. Now, Satisficers are different. They're good enough is good enough.
Okay, so they're not looking for the absolute perfect thing.
Nope. If it meets their needs, they're happy. They're not going to overthink every little detail.
And they're probably way less stressed about making decisions.
Right. They don't second guess themselves as much. They're often happier with their choices because they're not chasing some ideal.
Okay, so that's how our brains work with choices. But why do too many choices make us feel so overloaded? What's the brain science behind it?
Well, think about it this way. Your brain's working hard to evaluate every option. All the pros, the cons, the features.
So comparing 20 different types of genes.
Exactly. And the harder it is to compare, the more subtle the differences are.
The worse it gets.
Right. The more your brain has to work.
Yeah.
And that's where decision fatigue comes in. It's like a mental energy bar, and every decision you make drains it a little.
Oh, so that's why by the end of the day, I'm you pick the restaurant, I don't care.
Totally. And then the quality of your decisions goes down. You might just pick the easiest option, not the best one.
Or you just avoid making any more decisions at all.
Exactly. Now, there's this psychologist, George Miller. He found that our short-term memory can only hold 7 things at once.
7 things, plus or minus 2, he said.
Yeah, so if you're trying to compare 15 things, it just won't work.
Our brains can't handle it.
Right. It's too much input. Bottleneck situation.
So our brains are just hitting a bottleneck.
Exactly. And then there's the problem of regret. The more choices, the more likely you are to regret your decision later.
Because you're always thinking about what you could have chosen.
Yeah, and that makes you less happy with what you did choose, even if it was a good choice objectively.
So it's like you could be watching a great show on your streaming service
But still thinking about that one show on another platform.
that everyone's talking about, yeah.
Right. It's fear of missing out. FOMO. You
Yeah.
feel like you're always missing something better.
And that makes us feel anxious, right?
Absolutely. So the takeaway here is like, try to be more present. Enjoy what you have instead of worrying about what you don't.
Okay, and then there's the problem of expectations. We expect more when there are more choices.
Exactly. Like if there are 50 different types of coffee, the perfect one must exist, right?
Right. So even if we find a good one, it might still feel disappointing.
Yep. It doesn't live up to that hyped up expectation.
And this whole thing really hits the maximizers hard, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're always searching for the perfect thing, and it probably doesn't even exist.
So even the act of having choices can make us unhappy.
In a way, yeah. And then there are the trade-offs. When you choose one thing, you're not choosing all these other things.
And you're totally aware of that.
Right. You know what you're giving up. And sometimes all the choices just seem bad when you think about what you're losing.
So you end up not choosing anything at all.
It can happen. It's like, well, if I choose this, I'm missing out on that. It gets mentally exhausting.
It's like decision-making on hard mode.
Totally. And then there's adaptation. Like you get a new phone and you're excited.
But then you get used to it.
Right. And then you want a newer phone. It's like this treadmill. You're never truly satisfied.
So even if we found the best thing,
We'd eventually get used to it, and then we'd be looking for the next best thing.
so we're never truly happy, even with the perfect choice.
That's the idea. And then we've got to talk about social comparison. It's hard to not compare yourself to other people.
Especially now with social media. Everyone's showing off their perfect choices,
Exactly. It makes you feel like everyone else is making better decisions than you.
which obviously makes you feel worse about your own choices.
Right. So, be mindful of how much time you're spending online, comparing yourself to others.
It's so easy to fall into that trap. Okay, so it definitely seems like too much choice can be bad for us. But what does the actual research say?
Oh, the research is fascinating. Some studies really support this paradox idea, while others show a more complex picture.
Okay, interesting.
A really famous study is the JAM study. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yeah, the jam study, something about a grocery store.
Right. So they set at this booth with gourmet jam. One had 6 varieties, the other had 24.
A lot of jam.
Right. More people stopped at the booth with 24 jams. Like, way more.
Because, more choices. But did they buy more?
That's the interesting part. They bought way less. Like, only 3% of people who stopped at the 24 jam booth bought something.
Wow, that's a huge difference compared to 30% who bought jam when there were only 6 choices.
Exactly. So more choices attracted them, but also paralyzed them.
They couldn't decide.
Right. And they did a similar study with chocolates. Same thing. People were less satisfied when they had more choices.
Wow. And is there research on this in other areas? Like not just food?
Yeah, for sure. There's some research on academic essays.
Oh, interesting.
They found that students were more likely to write an essay when they had fewer topic choices, like too many choices, and they just couldn't get started.
Huh. Makes sense.
So there's definitely some evidence for this paradox of choice, but it's not always that simple.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, there are these things called meta-analyses, where researchers combine the results of lots of studies.
Okay, so it's like a super study.
Basically, yeah. And one of these meta-analyses found that, on average, the effect of having more choices is kind of neutral.
So more choice isn't always bad?
Right. It's not a universal law. But they did find a lot of variation between studies, meaning it depends on the situation, the person, all that.
So sometimes it's a big problem and sometimes it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And another meta-analysis dug into what makes the difference, like when does choice overload actually happen?
Okay, that's really helpful.
They found that the size of the choice set matters, of course, but also how complex the options are, how hard the decision is.
And how sure the person is about what they want.
Right. And whether they're a maximizer or a satisficer.
Right. So it really depends on a lot of things.
Yep. And a review of research from 2010 actually found that more choice didn't always reduce satisfaction or make people less likely to choose.
So it's complicated.
It is. The bottom line is it depends on you, on the situation, on the type of choice you're making.
Okay, so lots of things to consider.
Exactly.
Okay, we've talked about the paradox of choice, but let's really focus on choice overload. What's happening in our brains when we get to that point?
All right, so choice overload, sometimes called overchoice or even choice paralysis, is basically that feeling of, ah, I can't make a decision. There are too many options. It's like the main reason why the paradox of choice is a problem.
So it's not just that we have a lot of stuff to choose from, but it's what all that stuff does to our brain.
Right, it's the mental process.
Hmm.
So when we're evaluating all these options, it's using up our brain power.
Our brains are like computers trying to process too much data.
Kinda. We hit a limit,
Oh,
It's
yeah.
called cognitive overload. Too much input for the brain to handle.
And that leads to decision fatigue.
Exactly. Our mental energy is depleted, and that makes all the other decisions harder too.
So we just pick the easiest option, not the best one.
Often, yeah. Or we just say forget it and don't decide at all.
So we're basically giving up because it's too mentally draining.
Right. And sometimes, even after you make a choice, you're still not happy.
Because we're still thinking about all the choices we didn't make.
Exactly, like second guessing yourself constantly. And that takes away from the enjoyment of the choice you did make.
And for some people, that feeling is so strong that they just avoid making the decision altogether.
Yeah, it can be really daunting to face so many options. Like, think about picking a phone plan. So many providers, so many plans.
It's just easier to stick with what you have.
Sometimes, yeah. And as we talked about before, maximizers, they have a really hard time with this.
Because they're trying to find the absolute best option.
Right. And with so many choices, that search just becomes impossible.
While Satisficers are just like, yeah, this one's fine.
Exactly. They don't need to analyze every single option.
All right, let's talk real world examples. Where do we see this paradox playing out in everyday life?
Oh, everywhere. The grocery store is a classic. You go in for a few things.
It's just surrounded by like a million products.
Literally. Like rows and rows of cereal, tons of salad dressings.
Oh my God, the salad dressing.
It's insane. You just end up grabbing what you know because it's too much to process.
I've totally been there. Frozen in the coffee aisle, unable to choose.
And then there's online shopping, which is even worse. You've got millions of products to choose from.
And it's so easy to just get lost scrolling. Yeah.
You need those filters just to narrow it down. There's this author, Bill Bryson. He has this funny story about going to an American supermarket.
And just being totally overwhelmed by all the choices.
Exactly. He's like, why are there so many types of mustard?
I feel that. Okay, what about something bigger, like choosing a career?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. There are so many options now, so many different paths you could take.
Which sounds good at first, but
It's a lot of pressure. New graduates, people changing careers, they get overwhelmed.
I can imagine.
Even students at like MIT, where there are tons of options for majors and research, they feel it too.
So it's not just us regular folks.
Nope. And then, of course, there's dating.
Dating apps, especially.
Oh, yeah, dating apps are a whole other beast.
Yeah.
You've got access to so many potential partners.
Which, again, sounds amazing at first, but then
It makes it hard to commit to one person, right? Because what if someone better is out there?
just a swipe away.
Exactly. And you have these higher expectations, more FOMO.
So it's making dating harder, not easier.
In some ways, yeah. It's like you're treating people like products in a catalog.
Just browsing endlessly.
Right. And even with healthcare, the paradox of choice is there.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, you've got so many treatment options now, different medications, specialists.
It's good to have options, but
It can be overwhelming, especially if you're already stressed about your health. Like this doctor, he was offering a patient 3 different medications.
for the same thing.
Yeah, for erectile dysfunction. It's like, okay, maybe that's helpful, but it can also just be confusing and stressful.
So even when doctors are trying to be helpful, they might actually be making things harder.
Sometimes, yeah. And then financial decisions. Forget about it.
Oh, yeah, investing, retirement plans, insurance, so much stuff.
It's a minefield. You've got all these different investment options, retirement plans, credit cards. It's no wonder people procrastinate or make bad choices.
They just shut down.
Yep. There's this example of an accounting firm. They offer their employees 156 different retirement plans.
156? That's insane. How is anyone supposed to choose?
Right. Talk about choice overload. And even in education, students are feeling it.
Beyond just choosing a major, you mean?
Yeah, like which classes to take, which professors, which clubs.
It's decision fatigue before you even start your actual classes.
Totally. Even in like elementary school, teachers are finding that giving kids too many options can be a bad thing.
So it really is everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's a sign of our times, So many choices, it's almost impossible to handle.
Okay, so it's affecting all of us in big ways and small ways. But what's the real impact? Like on our mental health, our happiness?
Well, first of all, it's stressful. You're constantly evaluating, comparing, worrying about making the wrong choice.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It's not just during the decision, it's the anticipation of regret. Like, what if I make the wrong choice? Then I'm going to feel terrible.
So you're already stressed before you even start.
Exactly. It's a recipe for anxiety.
Yeah.
And all that decision making leads to, you guessed it, decision fatigue.
Which then makes you make more bad decisions.
Right. Because you're mentally drained.
Yeah.
So you might do things impulsively or just avoid decisions altogether.
Which is not always a good thing.
And all of these negative feelings, the regret, the feeling of missing out, the disappointment, they really add up over time.
And affect your overall happiness.
Exactly. There's research suggesting that having so many choices can actually make people feel more depressed and lonely.
That's kind of depressing.
It is. And Barry Schwartz argues that this constant pressure to choose the best, to have it all, it sets us up to feel inadequate.
Because no one can actually have it all.
Right. And it even connects us to a weakening sense of community. Like we're so focused on individual choice that we're losing those connections that used to guide us.
So this is bigger than just our personal choices. It's about society as a whole.
Yeah, I think so. Something to think about for sure.
All right, so we know this is a real problem, but what can we actually do about it?
Oh, there's lots we can do. First of all, try limiting your options. Like set some rules before you even start making a decision.
Okay, so like if I'm looking for a new laptop.
Decide on your budget, the features you absolutely need, and stick to that. Don't even look at laptops that are outside those parameters.
Because those limits actually help you.
They can. They make it less overwhelming. And it's the same with time. Set a time limit for your research, and then just make a decision.
That's a good one. I need to do that more often.
And remember that satisficing idea we talked about? Don't try to find the absolute best thing. Just find something good enough.
So I don't need the perfect pair of shoes, just a pair that looks good and fits well.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off. And before you even start looking, think about your values. What's really important to you.
So if sustainability is important to me,
Then prioritize brands that are eco-friendly. Don't even waste your time on the ones that aren't.
makes sense. What about those everyday decisions?
Oh, those can really add up. Try making some decision rules for those. Like, I always buy this brand of toothpaste.
So you're not standing in the aisle for 20 minutes comparing ingredients.
Right. You've already made the decision beforehand.
Hmm.
And set time limits for all your decisions, big or small.
So if I need to book a flight,
Give yourself like an hour to research. Then pick one and move on. Don't overthink it.
easier said than.
I know, but it gets easier with practice.
Yeah.
And gratitude can be really helpful. Like, focus on the good things about your choices, the things you have.
So don't dwell on the what ifs.
Exactly. Appreciate what you've got. Take some time to think about what you're thankful for. You can really shift your perspective.
Okay, that's a good reminder. What else?
Well, try to be really engaged when you're making decisions. Think about your needs, your preferences.
So not just picking randomly or because someone told you to.
Right. Make it an active choice. And as much as you can, treat your decisions as final. Once you've made a choice, stick with it.
Don't go back and second guess yourself.
Exactly. And limit your social media time.
Mm-hmm.
All those perfect lives and perfect choices.
Yeah.
It's not reality.
It's just making you feel bad about yourself, yeah.
It's a trap. And don't be afraid to ask for advice. Talk to people you trust, experts in the field.
But ultimately, the decision is yours.
You have to own it. And see your past decisions as learning experiences,
Even the ones that didn't work out.
especially those you learn from your mistakes. And simplify your routines as much as you can.
So you have fewer decisions to make overall.
Right. Less decision fatigue. And use technology to your advantage. There are tons of apps and websites that can help you make decisions.
Organize information, compare options.
Exactly. And don't forget about mindfulness. Pay attention to what your brain is doing, what your gut is telling you.
So you're more aware of your own decision-making process.
Right. And finally, remember, good enough is often good enough. Don't chase perfection, just aim for satisfaction.
I like that. So it's about being more mindful, more intentional.
And more accepting of ourselves. It's okay to not always have the best thing.
Great advice. So this paradox of choice, it's really about this struggle we have with having so many options.
Yeah, it's a modern problem for sure.
Mhm.
We think choices are good, and they are, to a point.
But too many, and it backfires.
Exactly. We get overwhelmed, anxious, regretful.
And it's all happening because of all these things we've talked about. Cognitive overload, fear of regret, FOMO.
Higher expectations, opportunity costs. that constant comparing ourselves to others.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And the research shows that while more choice isn't always bad,
It often is, and it can affect us in all areas of our lives.
from picking groceries to choosing a career, even finding a partner, it's everywhere.
And it's not just a minor annoyance. It can really affect our mental health, more stress, anxiety, even depression.
It's something to take seriously, for sure. So for you listening right now, think about one area of your life where you're feeling overwhelmed by choices.
Like right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And pick one strategy we talked about today. Just one small thing you could try this week.
To make your life a little easier, a little less stressful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's setting a time limit for decisions or making a rule about a certain type of purchase. Whatever works for you, experiment with it and see how it goes.
You might be surprised at the difference.
I think you will.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.